My name is Elias Krauss, and I've dedicated my life to the dusty corners of history, the forgotten texts, the secrets whispered in the margins of old books. As a professor of occult history at the University of Berlin, I've seen my share of strange documents, but nothing has ever captivated me like the legend of the manuscript of eternal cycles. It's a book, they say, written in a language no one can fully decipher, a maddening mix of ancient Greek, Nordic runes, and something else. Something that looks disturbingly like advanced technological schematics. They say it holds the key to understanding the cyclical nature of human civilizations. Birth, rise, fall, and rebirth. A pattern as old as time itself. Most of my colleagues dismiss it as a myth, a fanciful tale. But I know better. I've felt the pull of this mystery ever since I first stumbled upon a mention of it in the university archives, buried deep within a collection of declassified documents from the Cold War era. A single, tantalizing reference to a conference held here in Berlin back in 1972, where the manuscript was allegedly presented. And then, just as suddenly, it vanished. That conference has become my obsession. I've spent countless hours poring over the archives, searching for any scrap of information about the participants, the discussions, anything that could shed light on what happened to the manuscript. The university's records from that period are incomplete, haphazardly organized, as if someone deliberately tried to erase any trace of the event. But I persisted. I had to. The idea that a book could hold the secrets of humanity's cyclical fate, that it could offer a way to break free from the endless loop of rise and fall, it was too compelling to ignore. If the manuscript was real, and if I could find it, perhaps we could finally understand why civilizations crumble, why empires collapse, why we seem doomed to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. Perhaps, just perhaps, we could learn how to build a better future. My quest led me to a forgotten file, tucked away in a dusty corner of the archive, a file that had somehow escaped the purge of '72. It was a collection of notes, memos, and correspondence related to the conference. Most of it was mundane, logistical details, travel arrangements, and the like. But then, I found it. A handwritten note scrawled on the back of a conference agenda, dated the day after the manuscript's supposed presentation. The handwriting was frantic, almost illegible, but I managed to decipher it. It read, "It's too dangerous. They don't understand. What they're dealing with, it has to be hidden. Vogel knows. He'll keep it safe. God help us all. Vogel." The name was vaguely familiar. I checked the list of conference attendees, and there he was, Professor Heinrich Vogel, a prominent historian, specializing in ancient civilizations. He was one of the last people to see the manuscript, perhaps the very last. The note was a breakthrough, a confirmation that the manuscript was real, and that its disappearance was no accident. Someone, perhaps Vogel himself, had deliberately hidden it, fearing its power. This changed everything. It wasn't just an academic puzzle anymore. It was a conspiracy, a cover-up, and I was determined to unravel it. I became consumed by the mystery. I spent my days in the archives, my nights hunched over my desk, surrounded by books on ancient languages, cryptography, and the history of secret societies. I barely slept, fueled by coffee and the burning need to know the truth. My colleagues thought I was losing it. They warned me to let it go, to focus on my real work. But I couldn't. I was hooked. The manuscript had become my white whale, and I was Ahab, chasing it to the ends of the earth. I knew I needed help. I needed someone who could decipher the fragments of the manuscript's language that I had managed to find in the archives. Someone with expertise in ancient languages, someone who wasn't afraid to delve into the unknown. And I knew just the person. Dr. Margaret Whitfield, a brilliant linguist specializing in dead languages. We had met at a conference a few years back, and I was immediately impressed by her intellect and her passion for her work. She was based in Oxford, but I knew she occasionally traveled for research. I found her email address and sent her a message, outlining my findings and asking for her help. I tried to sound rational, professional, but I'm sure my excitement, my obsession, bled through the lines of text. To my surprise, she replied within a few hours. She was intrigued, she said, but also skeptical. She had heard of the manuscript of Eternal Cycles, of course. It was a legend in her field, a linguist's holy grail. But she had always dismissed it as a myth. However, she was willing to hear me out. She was coming to Berlin next week for a symposium. We agreed to meet. That meeting felt like a lifetime away. I spent the next few days in a state of anxious anticipation, going over my notes, refining my theories, trying to anticipate Margaret's questions. When the day finally arrived, I found myself pacing outside the cafe where we had agreed to meet, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. My chance to convince someone else, someone respected in the academic community, that the manuscript was real, that it was worth searching for. And then I saw her. Dr. Whitfield. Tall, elegant, with a sharp gaze and an air of quiet confidence. As she approached, I felt a surge of hope, mixed with a healthy dose of trepidation. "Dr. Krauss," she said, extending her hand. "It's good to finally meet you in person." "Dr. Whitfield," I replied, shaking her hand. "Thank you for coming." We sat down, ordered coffee, and I began to tell her everything. I showed her the note, the fragments of the manuscript's language, the records of the 1972 conference. I explained my theories, my hopes, my fears. She listened patiently, asking insightful questions, challenging my assumptions, probing for weaknesses in my arguments. I could see the skepticism in her eyes, but I also saw a flicker of curiosity, a spark of interest. "It's a fascinating story, Dr. Krauss," she said when I was finished. "But it's just that. A story. There's no concrete proof that this manuscript ever existed." "But the note," I insisted. "The missing records. Vogel's involvement. It all points to something." "It points to a mystery, yes," she agreed. "But a mystery is not the same as a fact." I knew she was right. I needed more than just circumstantial evidence. I needed proof. "Will you help me, Dr. Whitfield?" I asked, looking her directly in the eye. "Will you help me find that proof?" She hesitated for a moment, her gaze shifting to the document spread out on the table. Then, she looked back at me, a new resolve hardening her features. "All right, Dr. Krauss," she said. "I'll help you, but I have a condition." "Anything," I said eagerly. "We do this my way," she said. "We follow the evidence wherever it leads. No wild theories, no leaps of faith, just facts." "Agreed," I said, a surge of excitement coursing through me. And so, our partnership began. A partnership that would lead us down a rabbit hole of ancient secrets, hidden agendas, and dangerous truths. A partnership that would change our lives forever. Little did I know, as I sat there in that cafe, that we were not the only ones searching for the manuscript of Eternal Cycles, and that our quest for knowledge would soon turn into a desperate fight for survival. The game had begun, and the stakes were higher than I could have ever imagined. The first move had been made, but by whom? And to what end? I had a feeling I was about to find out, whether I was ready or not. The mystery of the 1972 conference was just the beginning. The real mystery was what lay beyond it, in the shadows, waiting to be unearthed. And I had a feeling that it was something far more ancient and far more dangerous than I could possibly comprehend. With Margaret on board, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her skepticism was a valuable counterbalance to my enthusiasm, grounding me in reality and forcing me to focus on tangible evidence. Our first order of business was to decipher the fragments of the manuscript's language that I had found in the archives. Margaret, true to her reputation, approached the task with a methodical precision that I found both fascinating and intimidating. She spent hours poring over the symbols, comparing them to known ancient languages, searching for patterns, for any clue that could unlock the meaning of the text. "It's unlike anything I've ever seen," she murmured, tracing the strange symbols with her finger. "There are elements of Greek, certainly, and some similarities to Nordic runes. But this is something else entirely. It's as if someone took different languages and blended them together, creating something entirely new." "Could it be a code?" I suggested, peering over her shoulder. "Perhaps," she replied, "but it's incredibly complex. If it is a code, it's one designed to resist any conventional method of decryption. While Margaret wrestled with the linguistic puzzle, I focused on the other lead we had, Professor Heinrich Vogel, the man mentioned in the note, the last person known to have seen the manuscript. I needed to find him, to talk to him, to see what he knew. But Vogel, it turned out, was not an easy man to find. He had retired from the university years ago and had seemingly vanished from public life. There were rumors that he had become a recluse, living somewhere in the countryside, cut off from the world. It took some digging, but I eventually managed to track down an address, a remote cottage in the Black Forest, a place steeped in folklore and ancient legends. It seemed fitting somehow that a man guarding the secrets of a lost manuscript would choose such a location. "I'm going to see him," I told Margaret, showing her the address. "I need to talk to him, to find out what he knows." Margaret frowned. "Be careful, Elias," she said. "If Vogel is involved in this, he might be dangerous." "I'll be fine," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I just need to ask him a few questions." But even as I said the words, I knew that this was more than just a simple interview. This was a confrontation with the past, a journey into the heart of the mystery. Before I could embark on that journey, however, we needed another piece of the puzzle. The archives had yielded another secret: encrypted files, digital records that were likely related to the 1972 conference, and the manuscript. Files that were protected by a level of security that was far beyond my capabilities to crack. We needed a hacker, and I knew just the person. Daniel Blake was a former student of mine, one of the most brilliant minds I had ever encountered. He had a natural talent for computers, a gift for seeing through the layers of code that protected the digital world. Unfortunately, he also had a rebellious streak, a disdain for authority, and a tendency to use his skills for less than legal purposes. He had been expelled from the university a few years back for hacking into the university's mainframe, not to steal data or cause damage, but simply to prove that he could. I had always felt a certain kinship with Daniel, a shared fascination with the hidden corners of the digital world. I found him in a small, cluttered apartment above a cyber cafe, surrounded by computer parts, empty energy drink cans, and the glow of multiple monitors. He looked up as I entered, a smirk playing on his lips. "Professor Krauss," he said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "To what do I owe the honor?" "I need your help, Daniel," I said, getting straight to the point. I explained the situation, the manuscript, the conference, the encrypted files. Daniel listened, his initial amusement gradually giving way to a focused intensity. "So, you're saying there's a secret book that holds the key to understanding the rise and fall of civilizations," he said, leaning back in his chair, "and you need me to break into some old university files to find it?" "That's the gist of it," I replied. "Sounds like a load of crap," he said, but I could see the spark of interest in his eyes. "But hey, I'm always up for a challenge." "What's in it for me?" "Let's just say, a significant financial reward if we succeed," I said, knowing that appealing to his sense of adventure might not be enough. I had secured a small research grant and was prepared to use it all if necessary. Daniel grinned. "Now you're talking. All right, Professor, I'm in. But if I get caught, you're taking the fall." "Deal," I said, extending my hand. With Daniel on board, we had our team, a linguist, a hacker, and a historian. An unlikely trio, united by a shared quest for a lost manuscript and the secrets it held. Daniel got to work immediately, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he navigated the complex layers of encryption protecting the university's files. It was a slow, painstaking process, but Daniel was relentless, driven by a combination of boredom, curiosity, and the promise of a hefty payday. While Daniel worked his magic, Margaret and I continued to study the fragments of the manuscript, searching for any clue that could help us understand its contents. We also delved deeper into the backgrounds of the other attendees of the 1972 conference, hoping to find either the connection to Vogel or the manuscript. Days turned into nights, and the pressure mounted. We were running out of time. I could feel it. The closer we got to the truth, the more dangerous our quest became. Then, one evening, Daniel called us, his voice filled with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "I'm in," he said. "I've cracked the encryption, but you're not going to like what I found." We rushed over to his apartment, eager to see what he had uncovered. He led us to his computer, where a series of files were displayed on the screen. "These are the records from the 1972 conference," he said, pointing at the screen. "But they're not just meeting minutes and presentation notes." He opened one of the files, and a grainy, black and white video began to play. It showed a room filled with people, gathered around a table. In the center of the table, bathed in an ethereal light, was a book, the manuscript of eternal cycles. We watched, mesmerized, as the camera zoomed in on the book. The symbols on its cover seemed to writhe and shift, as if they were alive. The people in the room were visibly agitated, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. Then, the video cut out. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Daniel replied. "The video just ends there, but there's more." He opened another file, this one containing a series of emails exchanged between the conference attendees in the days following the event. The emails were cryptic, filled with coded language and veiled references, but one name kept recurring: Heinrich Vogel. It was clear that Vogel had played a central role in the events of 1972, and that he was hiding something. Something important. Something dangerous. "We need to talk to Vogel," I said, my voice filled with a newfound urgency. "Now." But as we were about to leave, Daniel stopped us. "There's one more thing," he said, his face pale. He pointed to a small icon in the corner of his screen, a tiny red hand. "It's the mark," he said. "They know we're looking." The mark of the red hand. The symbol that had appeared on my computer, on the mirror in my apartment. The symbol of the cult that was hunting us. We were no longer just searching for a lost manuscript. We were being hunted, and I had a feeling that our time was running out. The appearance of the red hand symbol on Daniel's computer sent a chill down my spine. It was a clear message, a warning. They knew what we were doing. They were watching us, and they were coming for us. We had to move fast, armed with the new information from the encrypted files and the looming threat of the red hand. We set out for the Black Forest, for Vogel's secluded cottage. The drive was tense, each of us lost in our own thoughts, grappling with the implications of what we had discovered. Margaret, ever the pragmatist, tried to focus on the task at hand. "We need a plan," she said, breaking the silence. "We can't just barge in there and demand answers." "She's right," Daniel chimed in from the back seat. "Vogel is connected to some serious people. We need to be careful." "I agree," I said. "But we also need to be assertive. Vogel is hiding something, and we need to find out what it is." We decided to approach Vogel under the guise of academic researchers, interested in his work on ancient civilizations. It was a flimsy pretext, but it was the best we could come up with on short notice. As we drove deeper into the forest, the landscape grew more imposing, the trees taller, the shadows deeper. The air itself seemed to hum with a strange energy, a sense of ancient secrets and hidden powers. Finally, we arrived at Vogel's cottage. It was a small, unassuming structure, nestled among the trees, almost invisible from the road. Smoke curled from the chimney, a sign that the old professor was home. Taking a deep breath, I walked up to the door and knocked. The door was opened by a man in his late 70s, with a shock of white hair and piercing blue eyes. He looked at us with suspicion, his gaze sharp and penetrating. "Professor Vogel?" I asked. "Yes," he replied, his voice raspy with age. "Who are you? What do you want?" "My name is Elias Krauss," I said. "This is Dr. Whitfield and Mr. Blake. We're researchers from the University of Berlin. We're interested in your work on ancient civilizations." Vogel's eyes narrowed. "I'm retired," he said. "I don't give interviews." "We know about the 1972 conference, Professor," I said, deciding to take a more direct approach. "We know about the manuscript of eternal cycles." Vogel's reaction was immediate and visceral. His eyes widened, his face paled, and he took a step back, as if struck by a physical blow. "That's impossible," he whispered. "How could you possibly know about that?" "We found the records," I said. "The encrypted files, the video." Vogel's gaze darted around as if he were looking for an escape route. Then, he sighed, a deep, weary sigh that seemed to carry the weight of decades. "Come in," he said, opening the door wider. "We need to talk." We followed him inside, into a dimly lit living room, filled with books, maps, and ancient artifacts. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and pipe tobacco. It was the lair of a scholar, a man who had dedicated his life to the pursuit of knowledge. But what kind of knowledge? And at what cost? "Sit down," Vogel said, gesturing to a worn leather sofa. We sat, and Vogel took a seat opposite us, his eyes fixed on us with an intensity that was both unnerving and strangely sad. "You shouldn't have come here," he said. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." "Then help us understand," Margaret said, her voice calm but firm. "Tell us about the manuscript. Tell us what happened in 1972. Vogel hesitated, his gaze shifting to the window, as if he were looking for something, or someone, outside. Then, he began to speak. He told us about the conference, about the excitement, the anticipation, the sense that they were on the verge of a breakthrough, a discovery that would change the world. He told us about the presentation of the manuscript, the strange symbols, the feeling of power that emanated from the book. "It was unlike anything I had ever seen," he said, his voice filled with awe. "It was as if the book was alive, as if it was speaking to us in a language we couldn't understand, but somehow we could feel." And then, he told us about the chaos that ensued, the arguments, the disagreements, the fear. Some, he said, wanted to study the manuscript, to unlock its secrets, to use its power for the betterment of humanity. Others were terrified of it, convinced that it was too dangerous, that it should be destroyed. "And you?" I asked. "What did you want?" "I wanted to understand," Vogel said. "But I also knew that the world wasn't ready, that we weren't ready." He told us how, in the midst of the chaos, he had made a decision that had haunted him for decades. He had taken the manuscript, and he had hidden it. "I was the only one who knew where it was," he said. "I thought I was protecting it, protecting the world. But you were wrong," I said. "The manuscript is more than just a book. It's a key to understanding the cycles of history, and we need that key, now more than ever." "No," Vogel said, shaking his head. "You don't understand. The manuscript is not a key, it's a door to something else, something ancient, something dangerous." Before we could press him further, a noise from outside interrupted us. A car pulling up to the cottage. Vogel's eyes widened in alarm. "They're here," he whispered. And then, the door burst open, and a woman walked in. She was tall, athletic, with short, dark hair and eyes that seemed to pierce through you. She was dressed in black, and she carried herself with an air of authority and danger. "Professor Vogel," she said, her voice cold and clipped. "We need to talk." "Who are you?" I asked, standing up. "My name is Ingrid Bauer," she said, her gaze sweeping over us. "And you are interfering in matters that you do not understand." "We're just trying to find the truth," Margaret said, also standing. "The truth?" Ingrid scoffed. "You have no idea what the truth is. You're playing with forces you can't possibly comprehend." "And you do?" Daniel asked, his voice laced with skepticism. Ingrid ignored him, her attention focused on Vogel. "Where is it, Professor?" she asked. "Where is the manuscript?" Vogel looked at her, his face a mask of fear and resignation. "I won't tell you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Ingrid smiled, a cold, cruel smile that sent shivers down my spine. "Then we'll have to find it ourselves," she said. And then she turned to us. "As for you," she said, "I suggest you leave. Now. And forget you ever heard of the manuscript of eternal cycles. This is your only warning." We stood there, frozen, caught between the fear of the unknown and the determination to find the truth. We had come too far to turn back now. But what were we up against? Who was Ingrid Bauer? And what was the organization she represented? Before we could react, Ingrid pulled out a small metallic device from her pocket. It emitted a high-pitched sound, and suddenly Daniel doubled over, clutching his head. "What did you do to him?" I shouted, rushing to Daniel's side. "He's fine," Ingrid said, her voice devoid of emotion. "For now. But if you don't leave, if you continue to interfere, I can't guarantee his safety." Or yours." She turned and walked towards Vogel, who was now trembling, his eyes wide with terror. "Let's go," I said to Margaret, helping Daniel to his feet. "We need to get out of here." We stumbled out of the cottage, leaving Vogel alone with Ingrid. As we drove away, I looked back and saw them standing in the doorway, watching us. We had escaped for now, but we were no closer to finding the manuscript, and we had made a powerful enemy. As we drove in silence back towards Berlin, one question echoed in my mind. What had Vogel meant when he said the manuscript was not a key, but a door? A door to what? And were we ready to face what was on the other side? Vogel's parting words echoed in my mind. He had said something, almost a whisper so quiet that I could barely make it out. At the time, I did not think much of it, being more concerned about getting out of there. But now, driving in the darkness, the words came back to me, clear as a bell, as if someone was speaking them into my ear. "It's in the underbelly," he had said, "in the place where knowledge sleeps." It took a few moments, but then it struck me. He was talking about the university, but not just any part. He was talking about a place long forgotten, built but never used. The university's underground archive, abandoned decades ago. Vogel's cryptic words, "It's in the underbelly, in the place where knowledge sleeps," echoed in my mind during the long drive back to Berlin. The university's underground archive, a place I had heard whispers of but had never seen. A place that, according to rumors, had been sealed off decades ago due to structural instability. Could the manuscript be hidden there, in the forgotten depths of the university? It was a long shot, but it was the only lead we had. Back in my small, cluttered office, the relative safety felt surreal after the tense encounter at Vogel's cottage. The familiar scent of old books and the soft hum of the city outside were a stark contrast to the chilling presence of Ingrid Bauer and the mysteries surrounding the manuscript. "The underbelly," Margaret mused, breaking the silence as she examined a map of the university's sprawling campus. "He was talking about the old archive, wasn't he?" "It has to be," I replied, tracing the lines on the map with my finger. "A place, forgotten, abandoned, the perfect hiding spot." "If it even exists," Daniel chimed in, his usual cynicism tempered by the lingering effects of Ingrid's device. He was hunched over his laptop, trying to find any mention of the archive in the university's digital records, but so far he had come up empty-handed. "There's nothing about it in the official records. It's like the place was erased from history." "That's because it was," I said, remembering the fragmented emails we had found earlier. After the 1972 conference, someone went to great lengths to cover up what happened. They probably sealed off the archive and scrubbed it from the records to prevent anyone from finding the manuscript. But why go through all that trouble? Margaret wondered. If the manuscript is as dangerous as Vogel claims, why not just destroy it? Maybe they couldn't, I suggested. Or maybe they were afraid to. The thought lingered in the air, a chilling reminder of the unknown power we were dealing with. "Okay," Daniel said, interrupting my train of thought. "Let's say this underground archive does exist. How do we get in? If it's been sealed off for decades, it's probably not as simple as waltzing through the front door." He was right. We needed a plan, and we needed to be careful. If Ingrid and her organization were watching us, we couldn't afford to make any mistakes. We spent the next few hours brainstorming, considering various options, weighing the risks and benefits of each. Finally, we settled on a plan. We would enter the archive under the cover of darkness, using an old, disused service tunnel that, according to the map, connected to the main library's sub-basement. It was a risky proposition, but it was our best shot. As night fell, we gathered our equipment: flashlights, crowbars, a first aid kit, and, of course, Daniel's trusty laptop. We were as prepared as we could be, but a sense of unease hung over us, a feeling that we were stepping into something far, bigger and more dangerous than we could possibly imagine. We made our way to the library under the cloak of darkness, moving through the shadows like phantoms. The campus was quiet, most of the students and faculty gone for the night, leaving the old buildings to their secrets. We found the service entrance easily enough, a rusty metal door hidden behind a row of overgrown bushes. It was locked, but Daniel made short work of the old padlock, his nimble fingers working quickly in the dim light. The tunnel was dark, damp, and claustrophobic. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay, and the only sound was the drip, drip, drip of water, echoing through the darkness. We moved slowly, our flashlights casting long, dancing shadows on the walls, illuminating our path one step at a time. After what seemed like an eternity, we reached the end of the tunnel. It opened into a large, cavernous space filled with rows upon rows of towering shelves stretching up into the darkness. We were in the underground archive. It was like stepping back in time. The air was heavy with the scent of decaying paper and leather. Cobwebs hung like macabre decorations from the shelves, and a thick layer of dust covered everything. This place hadn't been disturbed in decades. "This is it," I whispered, a sense of awe mixed with trepidation filling my voice. "The place where knowledge sleeps." We began our search, moving slowly and methodically through the labyrinthine rows of shelves. The archive was vast, much larger than we had anticipated, and it was filled with countless documents, books, and artifacts, a testament to the university's long and storied history. Hours passed, and our initial excitement began to wane, replaced by fatigue and frustration. We had found nothing, not even a hint of the manuscript. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Daniel asked, his voice hoarse. "Vogel said it was here," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We just need to keep looking." But even as I said the words, doubt began to creep into my mind. What if we were wrong? What if the manuscript wasn't here? What if we had risked our lives for nothing? Then, Margaret called out to us, her voice filled with excitement. "Elias! Daniel! I think I found something." We rushed over to where she was standing, in front of a section of shelves that looked different from the others. These shelves were made of metal, not wood, and they were sealed with a heavy steel door. "This is it," Margaret said, pointing to the door. "This is where they kept the classified documents, the sensitive materials, and etched into the metal, almost hidden beneath a layer of grime, was a familiar symbol, a small red hand. We had found the right place. With renewed energy, we set about trying to open the door. It was locked, of course, but this time, it was a mechanical lock, not a digital one. Daniel, despite his expertise in cybersecurity, was stumped. "I can't hack this," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "It's too old-fashioned." But Margaret, ever resourceful, had an idea. She had noticed that the hinges of the door were exposed, and they were old and rusty. "Help me with this," she said, handing me a crowbar. Together we worked on the hinges, prying them loose, the metal groaning in protest. It was a slow, arduous process, but finally, with a loud clang, the door came free. We pulled it open and stepped inside. The room was small, and a car, and filled with a strange metallic scent. In the center of the room, on a small table, was a single object, covered with a thick layer of dust. It was a box, made of dark wood, intricately carved with strange symbols. Symbols that I recognized from the fragments of the manuscript. Could it be? With trembling hands, I reached out and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a book. It wasn't the original manuscript, I realized instantly. It was smaller, thinner, and the cover was made of leather, not metal. But the symbols, the strange hybrid language, it was unmistakable. It was a copy. A partial copy of the manuscript of Eternal Cycles. As I carefully lifted the book from the box, a piece of paper fluttered to the floor. I picked it up and unfolded it. It was a note, written in a neat, precise hand. "To whoever finds this, the knowledge held within the manuscript of Eternal Cycles is both a gift and a curse. It reveals truths about humanity's past, present, and future that are not meant for all eyes. I have hidden the original, hoping to protect the world from its power. But I fear that one day, someone will seek it out again." This copy contains only a fraction of the original text, but it is enough to glimpse the vastness of the cycles, the endless repetition of history. Use this knowledge wisely, and be warned. Some doors are best left unopened. H. Vogel. We had found it, a part of the manuscript at least, and a warning from the man who had tried to keep it hidden. But our victory was short-lived. Suddenly, the ground began to shake, and a loud rumbling noise echoed through the archive. The lights flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. "What's happening?" Margaret cried out, her voice filled with alarm. "I don't know," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "But I don't think we have much time." Then, a voice, cold and menacing, echoed through the darkness. Looking for something. It was Ingrid. We were trapped. Ingrid's voice, dripping with icy menace, cut through the darkness like a shard of glass. We were trapped, caught between the agents of the Veil of Order and the unstable archive, which seemed to be groaning under some unseen pressure. "You shouldn't have come here," Ingrid said, her voice echoing through the cavernous space. "This is not your concern." "The manuscript concerns everyone," I retorted, trying to sound braver than I felt. My hand instinctively tightened around the partial copy we'd found, its leather cover strangely warm to the touch. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," Ingrid said, a hint of something that sounded almost like pity in her voice. "The manuscript is not just a book, it's not just knowledge, it's a..." She paused, as if searching for the right word. "A device. A tool." "A tool for what?" Margaret asked, her voice echoing in the darkness. Before Ingrid could answer, a deafening crack split the air, followed by a shower of dust and debris. The archive was collapsing around us. "We need to get out of here," Daniel yelled, his voice barely audible above the din. He was right. We had to escape. But I couldn't leave without the manuscript. Not now. Not after everything we'd been through. Clutching the partial copy to my chest, I followed Margaret and Daniel as we stumbled through the darkness, trying to find our way back to the tunnel. The ground shook beneath our feet, and the roar of collapsing structures grew louder with every passing second. We were almost at the tunnel entrance when a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Ingrid, her face illuminated by the beam of her flashlight. "Stop!" she commanded, pointing a gun at us. "Give me the book!" "Stay back!" I shouted, shielding the partial manuscript with my body. My mind raced, trying to find a way out of this, but the walls were, quite literally, closing in. "There is no way out," Ingrid said, stepping closer, her eyes cold and hard. "The manuscript does not belong in your hands. Give it to me, and I might let you live." "Let us live?" Daniel scoffed. "You tried to kill me back in the cottage." "That was a warning," Ingrid responded, unfazed. "This is different." Then, another voice echoed through the archive. "Ingrid, stand down." It was Vogel. He emerged from the shadows, his face pale and drawn, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. He looked much older than when we last saw him, and far more frail. "Professor?" Ingrid said, her voice betraying a hint of surprise. "What are you doing here?" "I came to finish what I started," Vogel said, his gaze fixed on us. "I came to fix my mistake." He turned to me, his eyes pleading. "You need to listen to me," he said, his voice urgent. "The manuscript, it's not what you think it is. It's not just a record of the past. It's a blueprint for the future." "What are you talking about?" I asked, confused. "The cycles," Vogel said, his voice trembling. "The manuscript doesn't just describe them, it creates them." He explained that the manuscript was not merely a historical document, but a complex device, capable of influencing the course of human events. It was designed to guide civilizations through their natural cycles of growth and decline, ensuring their survival. But in the wrong hands, it could be used to manipulate those cycles, to control the fate of nations, to create a world dominated by a select few. "The organization Ingrid works for," he continued, "they call themselves the Veil of Order. They believe they are the chosen guardians of the manuscript, destined to use its power to shape the world according to their own design. They are not protectors, they are puppet masters." "Professor, you're not well," Ingrid interjected, her eyes darting nervously between us and Vogel. "I have never been more clear-headed," he responded. "The Veil believe they can control the cycles, but they are wrong. They are playing with forces they don't understand. Forces that will ultimately consume them." He turned back to me, his eyes filled with a desperate plea. "You must destroy it," he said. Destroy the manuscript before they can use it to create their new world order, built upon a foundation of controlled chaos. Destroy it, I exclaimed, clutching the partial copy tighter. But the knowledge, the understanding, some knowledge is too dangerous, Vogel said, his voice firm. Some doors are best left unopened. Before I could respond, the ground shook again, more violently this time. A large section of the ceiling collapsed, sending a cascade of debris raining down on us. We scrambled for cover, but Ingrid was caught in the open. The falling debris struck her, and she crumpled to the ground, her gun clattering away into the darkness. Amidst the chaos, Vogel seized his chance. He rushed towards us, his eyes fixed on the partial manuscript in my hands. "Give it to me," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "I can still fix this. I can still put the cycle back on its proper course." He lunged at me, trying to grab the book, but I held on tight. I didn't know what to believe anymore. Was he trying to destroy the manuscript, as he claimed, or was he trying to use it for his own purposes? Suddenly, a low hum filled the air, growing louder and louder until it became a deafening roar. The partial manuscript in my hands began to vibrate, to glow with an eerie blue light. The symbols on its cover seemed to writhe and shift, as if coming alive. "What's happening?" Margaret shouted, her eyes wide with terror. "It's activating," Daniel yelled. "The collapse, it's triggering something." The entire archive seemed to be resonating with the energy emanating from the book, from the place itself. It felt as though we were standing at the heart of a giant awakening machine. Then, I understood. Vogel was right. The manuscript wasn't just a book. It wasn't just a device. It was a key that unlocked something far greater, something far more ancient and powerful than any of us could have imagined, and we had just turned it. The humming grew even louder, the vibrations more intense. The ground beneath us began to crack, and a blinding light erupted from the partial manuscript, engulfing us all. I closed my eyes, bracing for the end, wondering if this was the final turn of the cycle, the ultimate collapse. Then, everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the collapsing archive. I was somewhere else. Somewhere vast and empty, filled with a swirling, ethereal mist that seemed to shimmer with all the colors of the rainbow, and yet none at all. I was standing on a platform of polished obsidian, stretching out in all directions into the swirling void. There were no walls, no ceiling, no discernible features, only the endless expanse of mist and the smooth, reflective surface beneath my feet. "Where are we?" I heard Margaret's voice, filled with awe and trepidation. I turned to see her, and Daniel standing beside me, their faces reflecting the same bewilderment that I felt. Vogel was there too, leaning heavily on his cane, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. Ingrid was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps she had been lost in the collapse, or perhaps she was somewhere else in this strange, ethereal realm. "Don't know," I replied, my voice sounding distant and muffled, as if it were being swallowed by the vastness of the place. "But I think we're inside." "Inside what?" Daniel asked, his usual cynicism replaced by a childlike curiosity. "The manuscript? Not just the manuscript," a new voice said. We turned to see a figure emerging from the mist, coalescing into a human form. It was a woman, tall and slender, with long flowing hair that seemed to be made of starlight. Her eyes glowed with an otherworldly luminescence, and her skin shimmered with the same colors as the mist. She was beautiful, ethereal, and utterly inhuman. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I am the Keeper," she replied, her voice resonating with a power that seemed to shake the very fabric of this place. "The Guardian of the Cycles." "The Cycles?" Margaret echoed. "You mean the manuscript? The rise and fall of civilizations? The manuscript is merely a tool," the Keeper said. "A device created to monitor and, in some cases, to guide the cycles. But the cycles themselves are far older, far grander than any single object." She explained that the cycles were a fundamental aspect of reality, a cosmic dance of creation and destruction, growth and decay, that governed not just human civilizations, but all things in the universe. Stars, galaxies, even the universe itself, all followed the same pattern, the same endless loop of birth, death, and rebirth. And you, she said, looking at me, you have awakened the device. You have seen the truth. But what is the truth? I asked, gesturing to the swirling void around us. What is this place? This is the space between the cycles, the keeper replied. The Shuni, the source. It is here that the patterns are set, the blueprints drawn, the seeds of the next cycle planted. She told us that the Veil of Order had been trying to use the manuscript, not just to guide the cycles, but to control them, to impose their own order on the universe, to create a world where their power would be absolute and eternal. But the cycles cannot be controlled, the keeper said. They can only be observed, understood, and perhaps, in a small way, influenced. To try to control them is to invite disaster. Vogel, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. I tried to warn them, he said, his voice filled with regret. I tried to tell them that they were playing with forces they didn't understand, but they wouldn't listen. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a profound sadness. I made a mistake, he said. A long time ago, I thought I could use the manuscript to prevent the fall, to save humanity from its own destructive tendencies. But I was wrong. The cycles are not ours to control. He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for what he had to do. The manuscript must be destroyed, he said, his voice firm. It's the only way to ensure that the cycles continue naturally, without interference. No, I exclaimed, clutching the partial copy tighter. We can't destroy it. The knowledge, the understanding. Some knowledge is too dangerous, the keeper echoed Vogel's earlier words. Some doors are best left unopened. She held out her hand, and the original manuscript, the complete manuscript, appeared in her palm, its metal cover gleaming in the ethereal light. It was far more intricate, far more powerful than the copy I held. It hummed with energy, its symbols pulsing with a life of their own. The choice is yours, Elias, the keeper said. You can choose to destroy the manuscript, to allow the cycles to continue their natural course. Or you can choose to keep it, to try to use its power, to shape the future according to your own desires. But be warned, she added, her voice grave. If you choose the latter, you risk unleashing chaos upon the world. You risk becoming the very thing you sought to prevent. I looked at the manuscript in her hand, then at the partial copy in my own. I thought of all the people who had sought to control the cycles, all the empires that had risen and fallen, all the civilizations that had been lost to time. Could I really be trusted with such power? Could anyone? The weight of the world, the weight of countless future worlds, seemed to rest on my shoulders. I looked at Margaret, at Daniel, at Vogel, each of them searching my face for answers. This was it. The final decision. The moment of truth. My gaze fell upon the partial manuscript in my hands. I thought of Vogel's words, of the choice he had made decades ago. A flawed choice, perhaps, but one made with good intentions. I knew what I had to do. We can't control the future, I said, my voice echoing through the void. We can only learn from the past and hope to make better choices in the present. With a heavy heart, I handed the partial manuscript to the keeper. She took it, her eyes filled with a gentle understanding. Then, she placed the partial copy alongside the original manuscript in her palm. So be it, she said. She closed her eyes, and the two manuscripts began to glow, brighter and brighter, until they were engulfed in a blinding light. When the light subsided, the manuscripts were gone. It is done, the keeper said. The cycle continues. A sense of peace settled over me, a feeling of acceptance, of understanding. We had made the right choice. Then, the keeper turned to us, and a faint smile touched her lips. Now, she said, it is time for you to return. The void around us began to dissolve, the platform beneath our feet fading away. I felt a sensation of falling, of being pulled back into the world of NKKR reality. And then, I was back in the archive. The rumbling had stopped. The dust was settling. The only light came from the emergency exit signs, casting an eerie green glow over the wreckage. Margaret and Daniel were beside me, coughing in the dust-filled air. Vogel was gone, and so was Ingrid. We had survived. But we were changed. We made our way out of the archive, leaving behind the secrets of the manuscript and the mysteries of the cycles. As we emerged into the cool night air, I looked back at the entrance to the underground labyrinth, now sealed by fallen debris. It was over. In the days that followed, we tried to return to our normal lives, but nothing was the same. We had seen too much, learned too much, to ever be the same again. Daniel, surprisingly, decided to finish his degree, his rebellious streak tempered by a newfound respect for the power of knowledge, and perhaps a touch of fear. Margaret continued her linguistic research, but her focus had shifted. She was no longer interested in simply deciphering ancient languages. She wanted to understand the underlying patterns, the hidden connections between language and the human mind. She eventually took a sabbatical, disappearing to some remote location. I suspect wherever she ended up, there were likely no cell towers, and definitely no internet. As for me, I remained at the university, but my perspective had changed. I still taught history, but now I taught it with a new understanding, a new appreciation for the vastness of time and the fragility of human civilization. The Veil of Order was never heard from again. It was as if they had vanished into thin air, their plans for world domination thwarted. Perhaps they were still out there, somewhere, waiting for their next opportunity. Or perhaps they had learned the same lesson we had, that the cycles cannot be controlled, only endured. And what of the manuscript? Was it truly destroyed? Or did a part of it survive, hidden somewhere, waiting to be rediscovered? I didn't know, and perhaps it was better that way. Some secrets are best left buried. Some doors are best left unopened. But late at night, when the campus is quiet and the stars are shining brightly, I sometimes find myself looking up at the sky, wondering about the cycles, about the endless dance of creation and destruction, and I remember the words of the Keeper. The cycle continues. Life went on. The world kept turning. Civilizations would rise and fall. And somewhere, out there in the vastness of time and space, the echoes of the manuscript of eternal cycles would linger. A reminder of the power of knowledge, the fragility of existence, and the enduring mystery of the human story. The human story that was, is, and will be again.